I'm a professional potter. I've been doing programs in Massachusetts since 1985. I make pottery for a living, but I also research and I'm a consultant to museums. The trade of pottery making in Massachusetts is very old. It goes back to the 1650s for the European introduction, but the American Indians were making it certainly before then.
So you have your own stuff?
I got multiple kilns. I sell nationally. I specialize in a kind of pottery called redware, which is what was locally made by the Europeans in a number of different areas in New England. And sometimes it's work pottery, other times it could be more decorative or more table use. I do it with my wife. We set up, I set up completely, we've been doing it since 1990 in Warren. So I do about 40 programs. The cultural councils bring me in to demonstrate at fairs like this or other programs, schools, historical societies. Right now I'm just making multiple pieces off of one lump. So we have three pieces, making the fourth piece now for this lump. There are only three forms to make on the wheel: flat, wide as plates, V-shape for bowls, and then cylinders. So you need to know what you're going to make so you know how to approach the piece. Section made, and I'll just take a knife, got some serrated teeth on it. I think I'll take this one here. There we go. Now we'll put this together. Take the little bottle, and I'll wet the neck, pull it just like I made the handle. The whole process of making pottery is pressure and motion. Pinching the clay causes friction. Friction needs to be relieved by wetting it. There. Just here. Come on, you. Please got a sense of humor sometimes. Come on. There we go. And then we just cut the top off over here. These are improperly attached, and there's only so much I can do for putting things together right now because everything is so gelatin-like, but it gives you an idea. By right, the whole thing the whole piece should stiffen to a degree where it's flexible, but it can take the abuse. It would be dried to a point where it's flexible like leather. It's called leather hard. If it continues to dry, it was flexible like a piece of sliced cheese, but it will start to crack. That's cheese hard. At that point, I can pass a knife through it and cut holes, but of course the spout wouldn't be on it. I'd be attaching the spout at that point as well. And then it's got to dry, and then it's got to be fired, because I don't make pottery on the wheel. I only shape the clay, what's called greenware. Firing is actually a physical change in the clay. You don't burn the pot, you don't melt the clay. And it's melting the clay that causes it to form in my case, a glass, porous glass. So So it's an opaque glass, it's a red glass, looking very similar to that bean pot there. Requires a glazing on it to seal it. In the colonial and early American period, it was actually all the way up until the Civil War, it was a very high lead glaze. But later on, we diminished the amount of lead and the way it was applied, but nonetheless, a lot of lead glazes were being produced in the time and being used. I have a business card here. We also have an open house next weekend, and my business card has up my website on it. Yep. Oh, thank you. Been at it for about 35 years now, overall. That's the difficult part of it, because I find that it doesn't intimidate people, but if you go to try it and you're not doing what I'm doing, I mean, nobody sees the problems that I had learning this. Yeah, because I can pull it off. Obviously, I'm staying with what I know right now. I'm doing things fast. I'm apt to try something different, but for this audience, I'm not going to do anything big either. I'm going to do quick and fast stuff. So, because most folks don't stick around in this type of crowd. There's so many other activities to do. So.
Alright, so which one is yours?
I'm Pi Potter Hamlin, and my wife is Kulina Folk Art. We both make redware. Kulin is the Latin root word for culinary, oven, kiln. So that's where Kulina comes from. We have a nice open house next week in conjunction with the studio tour. Got a lot of artists going through. There. Alright. Take another piece of clay. This is called the chum clay. And apprentices used to bring the chum to the potter. The potter should be good for making about 1,000 pounds of pottery a day. And as the clay's brought to him by an apprentice, and another kid takes the clay away, the finished pot, I should say, then you can use up 1,000 pounds a day. The apprentice would have to get the air out of the clay and blend it very smoothly, or relatively smooth, I should say, for the potter. Because the clay's called a chum, the apprentice would also be called the chum. So when the potter's screaming, "Where's my chum?" it could relate to the kid, it could relate to the clay. And as the potter works on the wheel, it gets really messy around it. And this stuff in the Middle Ages was called slough or slob. So I got my slob around the wheel. Let's see now, where do I want to go with this? Colonial and early American Massachusetts, actually all the way to the 1940s up in Exeter, New Hampshire, this would be the pot. If you ask the potter for a pot, this is what you get. A tapered base pot. For painting it, it's a paint pot. For fat in it, it's a fat pot or a large pot. This is actually the colonial bean pot. Bean pots like this don't show up in Massachusetts until 1830 or 40. That is not a colonial bean pot. And bean pots, for the most part, probably came up from Pennsylvania, as it seemed, or from a French colony, because the French and Germans did have the bean pot form in their pottery culture, but for some reason the English potters, this is the bean pot. And the beans would be a stew unless they were cooked down to a point where they would be a porridge. Or past that point, cooked down so they were a sliceable paste. And that paste is called bean porridge. And bean porridge was something a lot of people ate. The molasses beans didn't show up until the 1830s. Also what's known as the Boston beans, and that was being written about in the newspapers. There was a big competition which one was better, the red New York beans or the Boston molasses beans throughout the 1830s and 40s. But although Boston got the credit for the bean recipe, the molasses bean, the bean pot itself became popular in the 1880s. There was a pottery shop in Beverly, Mass. that got a contract to make 25,000 little miniature bean pots for reunion of Union soldiers in Boston. And the little bean pots gave way to naming of Beverly as Beantown, and the people of Beverly being called Beaners. Boston took that name, obviously. But the molasses beans is the Boston thing. The Beverly bean pots used to be monogrammed, or you could go in and ask for your name to be stamped on them, because it was the nature of things for a while for folks to bring their filled bean pots to a bakery so the beans would cook overnight in the hot or warm ovens for the next day's meal on Sunday or Saturday, depending on who you talk to. So occasionally you do find a bean pot with somebody's name stamped on the outside. But for the most part, that bean pot could be without a handle, could be one-handled like this one, could be two-handled. Before the 1840s, we made tall bean pots like this because everybody was cooking in fireplaces. Got to a point where we brought in cast iron wood stoves. And when people started cooking in cast iron stoves, they had a smaller baking box, so we started making short bean pots. So potters made two different sizes of bean pots, talls and shorts. So if you were a modern person in 1840 with a cast iron stove, that bean pot would have fit in there. Those are the real big stoves. So I'm going to pinch this clay, because when I'm laying with my weight into it to center it, I'm going to develop a dry surface, so I need to break that surface by adding water to it. The water will not soften the clay. The clay's already been mixed with water. All I need to do is just make it slippery. When I center the ball, I have to determine whether I'm going straight up or I'm going V-shaped like the bowl, or cylindrical shape like the large pot. I pinch the clay, starting at the base, going right up towards the top, making sure that I pinch that ring all the way around before I continue up. The bottom's got most of the clay, so that's where most of the pressure is applied. As you work towards the center of the pot, you'll find that the wall is already thinner, so you only need to pinch it so much. And as you get towards the top, possibly the only pressure that's required is to snap it back into center. Making a small jug, I'll put a handle on it. If you went to the store in the colonial early American period, you needed to bring your own container. This is a very Maine form. It's got that shoulder here, it's got a flare up here. The potters up in Maine and eastern New Hampshire Tended to do jugs like this with that flare on them. So there is a little bit of regional variation in the old pots, but unfortunately the trade's always been one where you can only service so much of a local market, and if you got sons that learn the trade, although occasionally a daughter, the boys would have to leave home at some point and try to open up a shop somewhere else. And the difficulty with that is there are so many different things on the market to buy back before the Civil War that need not necessarily buy redware. So shops in the trade are always coming and going. But in that sense, you have a potter, you have a line of pottery, the boys leave, they make the same glazes and forms that they learned in one location. So the stuff looks the same, whether you're in Peabody, Mass, or you're up in New Hampshire, the stuff looks the same. And that's why sometimes it's very difficult to identify, to specifically say, oh yeah, this is a New Hampshire pot. Peabody potters numbered about 150 of them during the War of 1812. Out in Charlestown, there were 125 of them before the Revolutionary War, but with the blockade of Boston Harbor and the burning of Charlestown reduced that to 2 potters after the Revolutionary War. Charlestown potteries were infamous, as well as the brickyards from Nova Scotia down to the Caribbean. And it's said that the brick houses down in the Caribbean were first built out of Boston brick. So it's a very, on one hand, can be considered a local trade, but in other instances, like with the Peabody potters, we're making sugar pots in the 1830s. We're making, turning sugar cane into sugar, and we're shipping them down to the Caribbean, bringing back sugar up into Boston area. Medford potters, the Medford distilleries are turning it into Medford rum, and then the rum is sent back, and the whole circle starts all over again. So I'm scraping the surface water off the pot now because I'm finished with the forming. I want to get it sticky so I can pick it up.
Yeah, the cops.
And cut it off using a piece of fishing line. Make sure I get the slob off my hands. Let it stick to my hands and just lift it up. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, thank you. I make it for a living, but I also do programs like this discussing the history of the pottery. What's that? Oh yeah. Yeah, I have a business card here, if you'd like to take it. It was a guy named Putnam up in Danvers, Mass. He was a brick maker. The Danvers company was called up to Lexington and Concord. A good dozen brick makers and potters responded, if not more. I'm still documenting the names, but 5 of them died. They were ambushed by the British. Not enough. We need a little bit more. So they were ambushed in a barn and they lost their lives. Putnam was one of the outspoken men leading up to the Revolutionary War. And after the Boston Tea Party occurred, he went back to, his house still stands in Danvers, the historic house. When he returned home, he found his wife drinking tea with her friends in the front parlor. And he said to her, no wife of mine will be drinking tea in this house. So she took the ladies and went up to the roof. She said, if you can't drink in this house, we will drink on this house. So that's a Putnam story anyway. But he was a brickmaker. So I'm pulling a handle right now for a teapot. I could also push the clay through a die, like the way toothpaste comes out of a tube, and make straps. This was a trade that was skilled and paid as skilled labor in the English factories up until the 1770s. But somebody created a box where you could put the clay in. The guy's name was Dodd. Pull a plunger and the clay comes out, the die. And that replaced all the skilled men in the trade with children and women who were paid less than half the wages. So the name of the tool, that extruder, was called the stupid. And you find some handles being extruded out of the local redware, for the local redware pottery here in New England. But you do find those cold handles too. Massachusetts, we made a lot of black teapots in the Salem area before and during the Revolutionary War. During the War of 1812, what happened was the embargo against the English pottery resulted in an explosion of this trade and production. The idea of buying American was suddenly really important to some people, others it was just no choice. And in one case out in the Connecticut Valley, out in Whately, also up in Leechmere Point in Cambridge, factories producing just black glazed teapots were created. And 12,000 teapots were the production of the Thomas Craft shop out in Whately. And he was shipping them all over. And he also produced stoneware pottery too with his sons, as well as redware pots and field drainage tiles. In other words, they produced whatever they could out of the clay to make a living. And business wasn't that bad until we settled and made peace with England again. And the English, who didn't stop shipping, stop producing white china plates and such, that before the war were selling for $1.50 a set, started shipping out to us same stuff for 50 cents a step, completely blew the doors off the shops. And leading up until the point when we were producing stuff all over the place, investors and bankers were approaching tinsmiths and glass makers and potters and saying, make American, build American. And that's what we were doing. The bankers and lawyers were also saying, you're going to have to pay me back for this. So when the English dumped the tin again and the glass and the pottery on the market, potters and the tinsmiths and the glass makers all had to disappear. A lot of them went up to Canada. A lot of bankruptcies. Really hurt the industry big time. Thomas Craft stopped making these teapots. Because everybody was buying white china teapots, and red clay, black glazed ones just weren't as colorful. So we got 3 pieces now. I'll do the bottom piece. trade goes, although you do find some places where the trade goes for generations, you also find other areas where it's almost potters only last for 7 to 10 years if they're lucky. You find the boys moving around. You do find ladies working the trade. Early on it seemed like they were just glazers in the shop. There's some documentation that the women are also potters. The trade would be learned as an apprentice. Leading up to the 1800s, that meant that you lived with a potter for 7 years, learned the mysteries and marvels of the trade. And then, at the end of it, maybe get a suit of clothes, some cash. In some cases, in some trades, you'd even get set up. There are printers that would set you up in other areas to open up a satellite shop of printing. Not so much for pottery. But when we started getting into the mills in the early 1800s, it got very difficult to get an apprentice. Because at the age of 10 or 11, instead of living with me, earning minimal or no money at all and learning the trade for 7 years, you could be shipped off to a factory, earn a wage and send money back to your folks. So what you find when we ramped up production during the War of 1812 was that the potters were not easily getting apprentices. What they had to do was they had to sign contracts that they would give $5 a year to the kid, $5 a year to the parents. The parents were, for learning the trade, it was a losing proposition. No money going to the household. And even if the kid did take the apprenticeship, like I said, once the war ended, the trade basically was a dead end. In Peabody, Mass, during the War of 1812, there were towards 100 potters. After the War of 1812, in the 1820s, we dropped down to 4 potters, and by 1850 we had 2 potters. It just isn't the demand. And you have white chinas, and glassware, and tin plate, colorful pottery coming in from England. This is pretty close to being a Whately teapot. It's got that shoulder, it's got the lid. The handle should be an extruded handle, and the spout would have been molded. That gives you an idea how teapots are. One possible way of making teapots. Oh, great. Bees like pottery because it gives off water to come in their drink. So I gotta be careful about that. So by right though, this should get holes in it. And this right now is very gelatin-like. So it needs to stiffen to a point where it's flexible. And if it's not cracking and it's like a piece of leather, it's called leather hard. If it continues to dry, it's still flexible but starts to crack like a slice of cheese, it's called cheese hard. So somewhere between leather hard and cheese hard, I'll poke holes in it, stick everything together. This is not constructed properly. The lid isn't stuck. All these pieces would fall off as this dries because I just tack them together. If you have any questions?
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me know if you'd like for me to come in under a grant. You can email me. We're doing our applications for the Cultural Council this coming week.
Okay.
They're due on the 15th. So if I can get a letter from you, then I'll process the application. I just need a letter of interest from you.
All right.
And I'll send it off to the council. Are you with Douglas?
Yeah.
You are. they're familiar with me. I've done a number of programs down here, so one way or another. And the Blackstone, well, I'm doing Millis next week, and Chain of Lights always has me come through.
Okay.
Do about 4 pounds. Busy weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, there are 5 different kinds of clays in Massachusetts. The most common is the red fiery clay. If you are going to be making, if you're making pots, you need a relatively smooth to a clay that doesn't have more than 10% sand. Because other than the shaping properties, you also need to allow it to dry and then be able to pick it up. My town of Warren, Mass, I can throw the clay, but there's no green strength. It's too sandy. I go to pick it up, it shatters in my hand. That clay, though, is got promises for making tile if it's 10 to 18% sand, or 18 to 25% sand for making brick. Because bricks are so thick, 2.5 inches thick, 4.5 inches wide, you need to allow that moisture to be given off easily. So we're talking the same red clay, but we're talking different needs. And the American Indian was also adding either gravel or crushed shell to the clay because their properties required a different clay, which means we're all working within sometimes we are changing the clay to be a particular body. In Brookfield, Mass, the smooth potter's clay would have to be mixed with sand. Out here in your area, your clay's all sanded. That's why no pottery history in this area, but brick making history.
Is it an association?
Very sandy clay. And some places like Ashland have such a coarse clay. In Northampton, south of Northampton, south end, the clay was so sandy it was just the bricks. Couldn't. One of the properties with a brick is you need to cleave it, you need to cut it. Exactly. Thank you. Yep, my pleasure. All right. There you go. I'm going to do a small version of a canteen.
Well, you didn't tell me your daughter was here.
It's called a ring bottle, or a hay cutter's ring. So I'm going to center this down. I'm going to use my strength, and I'll actually use my leverage and a little bit of strength. I'm going to throw one little piece over here. It's like a little bottleneck. Cut this off here. And then, completely different is the fact that I'm going to open this up, not leave a bottom here, and turn this into a big ring. Because this canteen's called a ring bottle or a switchel ring, and it dates to the early 19th century. One of those pottery shapes that the potters didn't make until later on. It's German in origin, but the Germans weren't the first to make it. It's also very Asian, and there are some Islamic versions of it too. They date back even earlier. So you pull up 2 walls, pinch them together, and that seals in a chamber. Now I'm going to cut this down over here, and cut down the inside. Yellow jackets and beads like pottery. They drink off of it, but when they come after the potter, forget it. Sit on my pots all they want, just don't bother me. Alright. So we got a hollow ring that would need to stiffen up for a little while. In this weather, probably just 3 hours is all it would need to get to a point where it's stiff. I have to scrape the clay off my hands to get the water off, because water makes the surface slippery. And if it were stiffened, of course it wouldn't lose its roundness. Then I'd cut a hole on top, attach this little bottleneck, use a corn cob for a stopper when it's fired. After it's fired, this would be what's called a ring bottle, and you can pass your arm into larger ones and rest them on your shoulder. It's also called the shoulder canteen. You carry this off in the fields, that way your hands are free to carry your siphons. It's also called a hay cutter's ring. And you can go off and work in the fields that way.
That was amazing. Who invented pottery? I mean,
well, the wheel goes back. We started making clay luck charms, or bad luck charms, about 15,000 years ago. And then it's claimed that basket making is earlier than pottery, and somebody perhaps smeared the inside of a basket with clay and put it too close to a fire. It's speculation. And the form was retained, the basket burned away, and that's how some people think pottery started.
all your stuff.
So about 5 to 8,000 years ago, taking a ball of clay and putting it on a rotating rock or a tile, a piece of clay, was a way of slowly turning a coil pot, which is an American Indian technique. It's an African technique. When you have people that are nomadic, this is about as far as they go. They don't develop the potter's wheel. But if you are a group that stays in a location, the wheel is created, and they think it's about 3,500 BC.
Wow.
Simple shaft, a simple wheel, turning it by hand. Eventually gets to a shaft where you kick the bottom, and skilled potters are found like 500 BC, and as well as the control of the kilns. And then there's some variations on the potter's wheel through time, but it is a very old technique.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It was in the colonial and early American period. Potters were numerous throughout Massachusetts. In some areas, like down in Taunton, there's Somerset, I should say, there's a place called Pottersville. There are potters towns and potters villages throughout New England. But in this area, I tell you, it's pretty hard to find a pottery shop, historically speaking, because the clay's so sandy that it wouldn't be a full-time brickyard, because the clay's suitable for brick making, but a full-time pottery shop, very hard to find. Probably if there was one in the area, and I've been looking for years now, the guy's doing farming, and he's making pots on the side to offset the store debt. He's doing it as a trade thing. And that's before the Civil War, the way that would be working out. So the guy would be a farmer, a potter, and a whole bunch of different trades. At Old Sturbridge Village, the guy's a farmer, potter, church deacon, choir leader, singing instructor, teamster, drover, carpenter, sawyer, blacksmith, wrote a singing book.
So how long do you have to bake or fire or whatever it is?
Well, that's really relative to two different things. You never fire, and that's why the teachers in school generally blew up everything that we put in the kiln. Because you always fire for the thickest pot, not the smallest pot. You fire for form. If I put wide platters into the kiln that I have, it's an electric coil, the coil's going to heat up the rim of that plate before the center if I accelerate too rapidly, and it's going to give me a nasty crack. So I could have the rest of the kiln with little tiny pots, that if the whole kiln load was little tiny pots, I could have it up to heat in 4 hours, maybe 6. But because of that one stupid platter, I got to slow everything down, and I'm probably going to do a preheat the day before. So the whole pot expands and contracts easily. If I'm doing large, thick-walled pots, same thing. You can't fire a brick the same way as a pot because bricks are solid. They're 2.5 inches thick, 4 inches wide. You got to get the water out of there too. So bricks blow up very easily if you accelerate too fast. In my kiln, for the average size pots that I make, generally speaking, with the 7-inch pitchers, 7 to 10-inch jars, you're looking at a 4-hour firing, 6-hour firing time. And another 10 hours to cool. And then I can take the things out. I don't make pottery on the wheel. I can only shape the clay. I make pottery in the kiln.
And do you glaze it as well?
Well, I glaze everything I make. Drop it in here. At least on the inside, but generally on both surfaces. And being that I copy or am influenced by pots that are from early America and the colonial period, they had the choice of glazing the inside or the outside. I should say the inside or the inside and the outside. Table pots generally are glazed on both surfaces. Fireplace pots and cooking pots is on the inside work surface. But I glaze everything. It's a porous clay I work with. Sometimes the glaze is to seal it, sometimes it's to give color, make it look a little more interesting. I can also use white clays or white clays in conjunction with copper to give green. This is an early American foot-trailed pot, something like I'd be making down in Connecticut.
So those are different clays in there, it's not?
That's a red clay, that's a white clay, and then there's copper over the glaze.
So there was no painting done on that, it was just...
Yeah, there is painting.
Oh, there is painting.
I don't know what you mean by painting though, because that's a general term. There's glaze on it, that's why it's shiny.
Oh, yeah, but the design itself is the clay within the clay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I meant.
Yep. Yeah, 2 clay surfaces plus copper for the green.
Where is your shop?
Out in Warren, Mass.
Okay.
Been there 22 years. I have business cards here. We have an open house next weekend too.
That's what we have on those.
Yeah,
And that's taking place where?
in the Brookfields, which is between it's on Route 9. It's about an hour away from me if you take the pike. 146 to the pike, get off in Sturbridge. Nice tour, some real high quality artisans. There's some real high quality artisans during that tour.
And all of these artists will be participating?
Yeah, at their homes.
Oh, at their home?
Yeah, it's an open studio tour. So we have 17 artists.
Oh, I saw all the
5,000.
addresses and I'm like, I wonder why they're listing the addresses.
Yep.
I thought maybe they were all going to be together. Or
No,
go to
there's
their
a
home.
map over there too.
Oh, okay.
So it's in 5 towns, 17 artists, about 7 or 8 different mediums.
Okay. Yeah.
What I'm doing right now is I'm making multiple pieces. And I'm keeping the clay a little slippery so I can pinch those pieces. The friction otherwise will cause me to lose the piece. Because I'm going thin with the walls. Here we go. So we got 4 and 4. I'm not making a pot right now, although I'm making pieces that I've been making all day. I just made 4 teapot spouts, but I'm not going to use them as teapot spouts. This is a shallow bowl, but I'm going to ruffle like that piece and the planter over there. I'm going to do a ruffle or a pie crust. It doesn't have to be perfect. Cut that off. another bowl rim. I've been doing this since 10th grade, so that's 35 years now. So I got a few tricks up my sleeve. I make it look easy, but if you ever do get on the potter's wheel, first thing you need is a sense of humor. Because you're not going to do what I'm doing, and you're going to be as bad at it as I was. So don't get frustrated and say to yourself, well, that guy knows how to do it, I don't. The fact is, when I first started doing this, I didn't know how to do it either. So you got to get a sense of humor, and you got to be able to be willing to practice it. Behind everything I'm making are a lot of mistakes. No failure here, because I didn't walk away. I didn't quit it. I stayed with it. So if you do try it, just remember that. Give yourself a break. If you get frustrated, laugh, and walk away. There's always another lump of clay to grab. Now I'm going to pinch this up. Cut that off. Yeah, I'll be 10 minutes, 15, you're right. I got everything all ready to move to the side of the street. Okay. I'm all contained, so I'll just wheel it off anyway, and then I'll break it down. So it's gonna be too much of a problem for you. Alright. I'm pinching the clay, starting at the base, going towards the top. And I'm pinching it in rings. I'm going to leave the base a little thicker. Now we're going to close this up here, so I'm going to wet the surface, get it slippery again. Close it up, just like that. Now it's like a balloon. I can pinch this right up. And we'll just clean up bottom here. Get the circle, get the wheel head cleaned up. Get that. This is all called slob. S-L-O-B. When I'm at home and I'm working, I got a pole over here with sticks out of it. It tells me how tall the pot is and how wide the pot is. So it's got two arms stretched out. The French call that mother. So my mother's over here with her arms stretched out, telling me how far I can go before I mess up. My mom also stands in all the slob over here, unfortunately. Cut that off. Flip this way. Like this. Bring it up like this. See, with pottery, it's very easy to say potters make pots. But after a while, you're going to start looking at things as a potter and you're going to say, that's a pot. If I only make those little pieces and put them all together, them into something else. sometimes as a potter I got a problem and I can't look at the whole picture. I got to look at the small pieces. I got to say to myself, how do I pull this together? I know how to make a bottle. I know how to make teapot spouts. Like that. This is going together very quickly. It's not the right way to stick pieces together. It probably will fall apart, but that's just the way it is. It's showtime right now. But as you asked earlier, there's a certain amount of time for drying. And if I were to do this properly, in this breeze, if I put it out on the tar, it'd probably just be an hour and a half at the most. Now we got the rim of the bowl. And that goes over
Oh, for
here.
heaven's sakes.
And then we got another rim of the bowl. That goes like that. And that can go like that. And then we take, let's see, oh, got a couple things I got to do here. Take this piece here. That goes like that. That's there. And then we cut this open. But it's a dragon. But the dragons always do something else besides fly, so I gotta get that done. So I use my garlic press. I use a lot of tools from the kitchen. Squeeze that out.
Oh, that's incredible.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
Happy to do it for you.
Oh, wow.
But this is also a hollow bottle, so I could cut a hole back here, take the fire out, put a hole in the mouth, and I could turn it into a pitcher using the back handle for a teapot.
Look at the things on it.
Let's see now. Do another piece. Hi, how you doing? Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm gonna, let's see, I got 10 minutes. I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna do a real weird teapot that comes from, actually, I need another piece of clay. Let me do one more piece of clay. I got 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna do a bigger one. I'm gonna do a Lebanese teapot. But from what I'm told, they don't even make in Lebanon anymore. It's one of my favorite things to make. This is also the last pot I'll be making because otherwise I'll be in front of the band. I think they're here now. So I'm going to do this Lebanese samovar. I'm going to pull the handle first. And that goes here. Goes like that. And this is a real weird teapot. I'm going to lay into this. Get the ball of clay round. I'm going to make the spout for the teapot. You can see where I'm pinching the wall between my fingers. I'm going to make a long tube, but my finger can't get down in there, so I'm going to use a stick from a poo-poo platter or shish kebab skewer as a substitute for my finger. Bring it up a little higher. And just want it a little smaller. And then we do the rest of it. This is a very odd pot. It's like a two-walled pot. I've already made 2 teapots here today, but this is a different kind of teapot. I'm going to go all the way down in the middle, leave a hole right at the bottom where my finger left hand is. Bring this up. Then over here, bring this up. So you can see I got a donut ring over here. And then I'm going to pinch this in. Close it off. That's sealed. Now we'll just take the water off here. Put that here. Alright, so the body of the teapot's done. Now we'll just take the spout to this long tube. Take my cheese cutter, should be here we go. By right I should put a hole right at the base. Then I cut this, that attaches right here, runs up the top, bends off over like that. And usually they're left very organic, I guess is one way to put it. And then this handle goes here. And that's a Lebanese teapot called a samovar. Without a cover, means there's only one way to fill it. That's what I like about it. The hole at the bottom. So you flip it over, you fill it through the hole, the water goes up the chamber, comes out the spout, you flip it over, that tube inside traps the water in there. So it's a different kind of teapot. So they don't make these, I don't think, anymore in Lebanon. People under the age of 30 have no idea what I'm talking about when I ask them about it. Well, thank you. I gotta get out of here for these guys now. Thank you for visiting. Hope you enjoyed it.